I'll go hang out with Nelson. Good afternoon. Welcome to the February 15th meeting of the Brentwood Rotary Club. For those of you visiting today, my name is Michael King, and I am the president of this club for 19 more weeks. Today's invocation will be given by Patrick Wright, followed by John Miles with the pledge and four-way test. And our secretary, Keeley Hall, is going to rifle through our guests because he's leaving early. So,
hey, tell on me.
Patrick Wright.
Hey, works. Please join me in prayer. Almighty God, we come to you today with thankful and grateful hearts for all the blessings of life which you have richly bestowed upon us. We're thankful for this opportunity to freely gather as a group of Rotarians committed to making this place we call home a better community. Father, we ask that you would bless the work that we seek to do here in Brentwood, that it might please you and benefit those with whom we come into contact. In our Rotary family, we remember Bart King and his family today and the recent loss of his brother Preston. We just ask that you would bring your peace to Bart and his family during this time. In a world where conflict often appears to be a way of life, we give thanks that as Rotarians we can reach across so many borders to offer comfort, counsel, and service to those in need. As we lift our voices in prayer, we give thanks that we have the ability to offer our time, our talents, and our financial resources to serve our community and the world. And now we ask that you bless this food to nourish our bodies and use us as your servants to bring about peace and to serve the needs of others. All this we ask in the name of the one who is the ultimate model of service above self, even Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now let us affirm the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First,
is it truth?
Second,
is it fair to all concerned?
Third,
will it build goodwill and better friendships?
And fourth,
will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Apparently Jim Villers isn't here. All right, Secretary Hall.
Yes, President King. All right, I'm looking forward. Jared, Jared has our first guest, and he will introduce him.
I'd like to introduce Michael Smalley, a good friend. Actually, was at high school with his wife. Michael's had an interesting last couple of years. I'll let you tell them about it.
I recently had a kidney transplant on November 6th. Very nice to be up and about now.
I had somebody ask what he said exactly. He had a kidney transplant in November, so that's pretty amazing. Let's see. Next is Jack. Sorry. It's right in front of my nose.
Today, my guest is Glenna Orr. Glenna is from Jackson. She's been moved here to this area, and she has read the speaker's book and is here because she's planning a trip on the Natchez Trace. I'm sorry, Johnson City.
All right, and Brian Shaw does not have a guest. Do you have a guest? Brian Shaw. I just wanted everybody to know Brian doesn't have a guest today. But Gil Walker does.
Well, I'm honored to be sitting here with four good-looking ladies. And I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Beth Gittensburg. Yeah. She is one of the top performers for Clark's real estate. She's really good. She's been number one numerous times. She's a sweet lady and she's going to be an asset out as well. She's interested in finding out if you guys behave yourself today. Put up your best.
All right, let's see. Curry Andrews has a guest that he apparently refuses to sit next to. It's actually a visiting Rotarian, but I thought you might want to introduce him.
It's my great pleasure to introduce my wife's oldest son, Nelson Andrews, who's a member of the Morning Club, and we're proud to have him in our family, and he's running for commissioner. I hope everyone knows that. Thank you.
All right, and we do, Vincent Nord, where is Vincent? Vincent, all right. For some reason, we had you down as a guest of Brian Shaw, but that's clearly incorrect.
Pleased to introduce Vincent Nord, is my friend of mine. He's also a tax attorney, fellow graduate of the University of Florida, tax LLM. He's currently practicing up in Chicago. He's come down here to defrost after the recent cold weather bout up there, but kind of from Tennessee and kind of looking to relocate down here. So anyway, welcome Vincent.
And Jennifer Shepard, you have our next guest.
Thank you. I'm pleased to introduce Demetria Zellen. We have been friends for several years. She's with Cry Like Realtors, and she is the Regional Director of Relocation and Business Development. And interesting story, when she was growing up, her father was a Rotarian, and she had the opportunity to do the Rotarian Youth Exchange. They hosted a student from Sweden for 1 month, and then she went and spent a month in Sweden. So if you've ever wanted to hear information about that, track Demetria down before we leave.
All right, and we do have several visiting Rotarians. We've already talked with Nelson Andrews and his member that brought him. Let's see, we've got Steve right there in front of me. Steve, welcome. Would you like to say a few words to your friends?
Oh, hello, everybody.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Larry.
All right, and we've got Mark Beeman. Mark. Pronounced Beeman? All right, Mark Beeman from LaGrange, Kentucky. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for being here. And Bruce Arnheimer. Again, I'm contractually obligated to say Bruce has had perfect attendance since the creation of the universe, correct?
Correct.
Never missed a day. 1962, perfect attendance since 1962. All right, and now we have Scott. I was just about to say his name. Scott Rader from the Downtown Nashville Club. Welcome, Scott. Very happy to have you. Also hailing from the Downtown Nashville Club, Tom Swain. Tom, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, have I missed any guests or visiting Rotarians?
Yes, you have.
Speak now. Oh, Denise. Where's Denise sitting?
Right here. Assistant District Governor, nice job.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you today Assistant District Governor Denise Schroeder.
Thank you. Came to check on Michael and make sure he hadn't skipped out since there's only 19 weeks left, and also came to surprise my dear friend Curry.
Welcome. Did you think that covers it? Did I miss anybody? Raise your hand. Not. Back to you, President King.
All right, thank you, Keely. Now get the hell out of here. All right, so a few announcements here. There will be a brief board meeting right after this meeting, somewhere around here. Pancake Day Committee is having a meeting, Rodney informs me, across the way from the reception area. It'll be in that room right there. Look for Rodney, and that's where you're going to be. This week, please leave the tables and chairs right where they are. Clean up the stuff on the tables and whatnot, but the tables and chairs can stay right where they are. Next week, well, let me get to this. We had our cornhole semifinals today, and Jane Covington beat Susie Lindsay. So Jane is in the finals against Marlala Parsons next week. And then Devin McClendon, in the fastest game I have ever seen, knocked off Warren Bryan. So Devin McClendon's going to have to bring his A game against Chief Hughes next week, and those will be our finals. And that brings me to next week. Next week, our meeting is going to be our cornhole tournament finals. And Larry has asked me to let you know the way that's going to work, the way we're going to set it up. We will start the meeting early. So I will get all the announcements away between 12:10 and 12:15, and then the meeting will start. So get here early, get your food, get settled. And the way it's going to work is we're going to have a space in between these two rows of tables here where the ladies will have their match. And we'll have a space between these two rows of tables here where the gentlemen will have their match. Once those matches have been completed, we will set up the cornhole tournament right here, and the women's champion and the men's champion will play for the overall championship. So, practice, you finalists, practice your game, practice, and let's see if somebody can knock off Jeff Hughes, because I'm really tired of him winning all the time. Okay, let's see, what else do I have to announce? Nothing. All right, so Jennifer Bourne is going, yes sir. Sure. Here, up here. You need these again? Yeah. Okay.
That you cut me out last week and didn't let me speak. I just want to close for my own self and thank everybody for their attendance at the Little Harpeth River cleanup. A couple weeks ago, we had 110 people come out, picked up 75 bags of trash that weighed over 400 pounds. We didn't leave trash in places that it didn't go, which is awesome. And for those of you that showed up the day of and jumped in, took a team, and led them out to clean. I am very grateful for that because, as you know, it is kind of a build-as-you-go process. But next year, January 25th, last Saturday of January 2020, and we do have a makeup date on February 1st. Thank you.
Hey, Mike. Okay, I forgot one other thing. I did want to read this. It was a thank you note from Ray Marie Little. It says, "Dear Brentwood Rotary Club, thank you so much for the beautiful arrangement to honor the life of our precious Abby. The show of care, along with prayers, words of encouragement, hugs, and care news means so much to us as we go through this time of grief. With appreciation, Ray and Marie." So we got that. And then finally, I do like to say, welcome to John Stokes for making it out here today. Always good to see you. Steve Smith, it was nice for you to take some time out of your busy schedule and grace us with your presence. Sarah Johnson, it was very nice of you to come and be here. Oh, I forgot, we're not going to do Happy Bucks. I screwed that up, Drew. But Larry, you do have an announcement. I'm sorry. Fire me. Please.
Real quick, some time-sensitive matters on the golf tournament. We are sold out of major sponsors. If you have a good problem and a bad problem, don't get too excited. If you have that sheet, those are gone. So don't try to sell somebody unless it's a whole sponsor or a four-way test sponsor. Those are playing spots. You can still sell those, but all the other sponsorships are sold. Great job. I need a graphic artist. So if anybody in here is a graphic artist or has a graphic artist that might help us on something for the golf tournament, I need that. See me later. I got this question. I am not calling your sponsors from last year. Somebody thought I was calling all the sponsors and asking for their whole sponsors. I'm not doing that. That's your job.
So, you got a sponsor last year, call me. Nobody else is gonna call it. Last week, if you haven't gotten the folder, they're on the white label there. There's still some out there, so I know some of you don't have them. Pick those folders up. You've done a great job. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Larry. Okay, I think that's it. Jennifer, you ready now? God, I've been waiting all day.
No, I'm okay. I'm good. Welcome. I won't move. No, because I think he's taller than me. I know he's taller than me, actually. Okay, we're going to welcome today Tony Turnbow. Is that right? Turnbow? Okay, he lives here in Franklin. He is a... Do you live in Franklin? I didn't ask that. He practices law in Franklin. He is a graduate, Bachelor of Arts, and a concentration in Southern U.S. History from Vanderbilt University, and has a Juris Doctorate from the University of Tennessee College of Law. He is 30 years, studied history of the Natchez Trace, and in that exploration, he continued training and has unpublished primary sources about the Natchez Trace. He authored the Natchez Trace in the War of 1812 in the Journal of Mississippi History, and he has published articles in the Tennessee Historical Quarterly and the Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation journal, We Proceeded On. He also wrote a full-length play, Inquest on the Natchez Trace, about the mysterious death of Meriwether Lewis. In the course of writing a book about Lewis's death, Mr. Turnbow discovered unpublished accounts of Andrew Jackson's 1813 Natchez expedition. So he's here today to talk to us about his new book, Hardened to Hickory, about Andrew Jackson. Please welcome Tony Turnbow.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here today. I've been told that as new people move into the area, they want to know about the origin. What's the history of this area? How did we come about to be here? And a lot of that is the history of the old Natchez Trace. And if you don't carry anything else away from today's meeting, I hope that you'll remember that the old Natchez Trace, or at least one portion of it, went right through Brentwood. And I'll tell you about that in just a few minutes. I got interested in this when I was a student in high school. I had a great teacher who took us out to the old Natchez Trace one day and showed us on this old dirt path that I had played on many times as a kid, had no idea what it was. And he said, "Let me tell you a story." And from that moment, because one of the stories he told us was about the mysterious death of Meriwether Lewis, which would be for another day. But he told us about Andrew Jackson marching Tennessee volunteers down the Natchez Trace to battle the British during the Battle of New Orleans. And as a boy, I wanted to know more about it. Well, where did they stop? Where did they camp? Did they meet any Indians along the way? And he didn't have the answers to that. And as I studied history at Vanderbilt and later on, I was disappointed to read the Jackson biographies, that very few of the biographers even talked about that portion of Jackson's life when he became Old Hickory. And those who did devoted no more than a couple of paragraphs or maybe 5 pages at the most. And I didn't know why. About 7 years ago, Rick Warwick, who's the Williamson County historian, handed me a copy of an old journal. And he said, "Take a look at this and see what you think." And when I saw it, I realized it was one of the journals from Jackson's officers from the Battle of New Orleans that had never been published. And I said, "Where has this been?" And he said, "Well, it's been in his trunk here in Franklin for 200 years. I said, "Well, it needs to be published," and we need to find out about it. Well, that led me to believe that maybe there's more information about Jackson. It's hard to believe somebody as controversial as Andrew Jackson has not had something published about every part of his life. But maybe there's something else out there. So I've spent 7 years tracking down journals, letters, newspaper articles, and I found quite a bit that tell the story of the period when Tennessee became the volunteer state and Andrew Jackson became Old Hickory. Early on, right after the Revolutionary War, this area we're in today was the Chickasaw Nation. Cherokee claimed it as well. They called it the Middle Ground, but Indians fought over this area. The Chickasaw considered it their area. And when the Cumberland settlers moved in and created the fort there on the Cumberland River with James Robertson and the others, they were attacked about every 10 days. Someone died about every 10 days because the Indians realized what their presence here meant for the future of their Indian nations. There was an old Indian trail that went from Nashville down to the center of the Chickasaw Nation that we know today as the Chickasaw Trace. A lot of people think of it as the Natchez Trace. But it actually ran on the west side of the Tennessee River, went up to where Dixon is, down to Charlotte, and came down what used to be Charlotte Pike into Nashville. That was the old Chickasaw Trail. In 1783, Chickasaw Chief Pyomingo appeared on that trail and offered to meet with James Robertson. And he had a deal he wanted to propose. He offered to allow the Cumberland settlers to remain there and to give them the land that went down to what's now south of Leaper's Fork. and they would help protect the Cumberland settlers from the Creeks and the Shawnee and the others who were trying to destroy them. But there was something he wanted in exchange. He said, I propose that we build a new path between our two nations. It'll be a road of peace. No bloodshed will be made on it. But it will develop a friendship between our two nations. It will develop commerce between our two nations. And Robertson agreed. This was their chance to finally be able to claim this land that became Nashville and Middle Tennessee. That trail became known as the Natchez Trace. It was a shorter trail than the old Chickasaw Trace, and it ran roughly down Granny White Pike, right through the middle of Franklin, on down through Leaper's Fork, and then went west from there down into the Chickasaw Nation. And it became a road that did become a road of commerce and a road of peace between the two nations. Well, that's kind of the setup for the story of how Andrew Jackson became Old Hickory, because Jackson, very quickly, with his background, his father died before he was born. During the Revolutionary War, when war broke out, Jackson was only 13 years old, but he agreed to serve as a messenger boy. He volunteered to serve during the war, he and his brothers, as they were raised by their mother. And the story is told one day that as Jackson was visiting one of his cousin's house, his cousin was away from home as a soldier, left his young wife and defenseless children with him. A British soldier barged in and saw Jackson. And when he saw Jackson, he demanded that Jackson stoop down and shine his boots, which was to show dishonor to this young American boy. And rather than run away or cower in the corner, it said that Jackson stood up to the soldier, told him that he was an American citizen and he demanded his rights as an American citizen. Well, the soldier answered that call. He took out his sword, he reared back, and he struck Jackson across the head, cutting a large gash in his forehead. Jackson raised up his hand in defense and cut a gash on his hand. And from that point forward, Andrew Jackson carried a scar from that British soldier's sword on his forehead. And I say in the book, you know, Andrew Jackson didn't need medals on his uniform to demonstrate his bravery. Anybody who saw him saw that scar that he got as a 13-year-old boy standing up to the British crown demanding his rights as an American citizen. I think the soldiers because he didn't have a father, the soldiers in the Revolutionary War took Jackson and his brothers under their wing and really taught them lessons in manhood that their father would have taught them. But it instilled in Jackson this love of the military. And every boy's hero at that time was George Washington. Everybody wanted to become the next General George Washington. Andrew Jackson certainly did, and that played a role in this part of the story. Jackson and his brothers were thrown into a prison by the British soldiers. His mother broke them out. And as his brother was dying and being carried home on a horse, Jackson had to walk 40 miles barefoot in the snow alongside his dying brother. When they got back home, his brother died. Jackson recovered, then his mother went away to take care of other soldiers from the family. And Jackson was home one day and someone delivered this small package of his mother's belongings inside of her dress that was put together as a pouch. And Jackson realized that his mother had died, and he was now an orphan on the rough frontier. And he often called himself an orphan of the Revolution. And he said that the British had taken everything from him that he held dear as a child. And some believe that instilled also in Jackson a desire to show revenge over the British that would also change his life. He later decided to practice law. He moved to Nashville as one of the first federal prosecutors in what was called the Miro District. And he began a business, a store downtown, where farmers would bring in their goods. They would sell it to Jackson, and Jackson would ship them down the Mississippi River to sell in Natchez and New Orleans, and then come back up the Natchez Trace. And so he developed a relationship with all the people who lived along the old Natchez Trace and the Indians as well. But he still wanted to become this general, and so he ran for Major General of the Tennessee Militia at a young age. But it still wasn't quite the honor that he wanted, you know, as the next General George Washington. The general in charge of the U.S. Army at that time was General James Wilkinson. He was a Revolutionary War hero as well. But Wilkinson was a spy for Spain. They called him Agent 13. He gave up his loyalty early on, and he went on their payroll. And he agreed to sell American intelligence to the Spanish in exchange for money. He was responsible for the death of American soldiers, for some of the intelligence that he gave them. He gave the Spanish intelligence about the Lewis and Clark expedition and tried to have Lewis and Clark captured and killed. But Lewis and Clark evaded the Spanish soldiers along the way. Wilkinson was kind of the J. Edgar Hoover of his day. He had intelligence throughout the U.S. Army, and so whenever anyone tried to bring some kind of prosecution against him, he would always be able to present evidence against whoever was bringing charges against him. After the Revolutionary War, the Congress decided they would select Anthony Wayne, we call him Mad Anthony Wayne, as the primary general in charge of the Army. Wilkinson was disappointed because that was the job he wanted. And so Matt Anthony Wayne discovered that he began to have problems with James Wilkinson. One of the tricks that Wilkinson played on Wayne was once Wayne had his soldiers far away from the supply sources, he discovered that his supplies began to dry up. And Wilkinson, who was trained as a physician, said he had never seen anything like it in his life. That soldiers who were confined in a small space in poor conditions of weather would begin to die quickly from the disease that spread very quickly. And so that was a trick that he used later on against General Jackson. And then one day a tree fell on Anthony Wayne's tent. He narrowly escaped what some believe was an assassination attempt by General Wilkinson. General Wilkinson, Matt Anthony Wayne was trying to have Wilkinson prosecuted for treason, for cavorting with the British. And then Anthony Wayne died suddenly at age 51 from stomach pains that his family believes was poisoning by General Wilkinson. General Wilkinson wrote to his Spanish paymasters with crocodile tears saying, "Poor General Wayne, prosecution is in the grave with General Wayne." It seems pretty clear that he had General Wayne assassinated. And Andrew Jackson would be his next attended victim. Wilkinson and Jackson became cross over the Natchez Trace as it came through our area. When Thomas Jefferson was elected president, he realized that the country had a problem. We relied upon the militia system at that time. We didn't have a large standing army. And so if we were attacked, it was important that the soldiers who were part of the militia would be near to the action where they could defend their homeland. And at that time, most of the settlers lived from this point north up into Virginia and Kentucky and farther north. And just south of us was the Chickasaw Nation, the Choctaw Nation, and there were Americans who lived along the Gulf Coast. He looked at the map of the U.S., and Jefferson wanted this to be a continental United States. But right through the middle was this big river, the Mississippi River. And Jefferson said, whoever controls this river will control the future of this continent, because this is where most of the commerce will go, down this river to Europe. And he looked at the map and he says, New Orleans is the one spot on the globe that will control the future of this continent. Whoever controls New Orleans will control the future of this country. And he realized the U.S. had to control New Orleans. But how did we get the soldiers down to New Orleans if we were attacked by the British? Jefferson needed a military highway to be able to move the large numbers of troops by wagons from Tennessee down to Natchez and New Orleans. It had to be a secret highway because we didn't want anyone to know that we had this ability to move troops, and that was only part of one of his mission as well. And so if you read the letter that Jefferson sent to Congress asking for money for the Lewis and Clark expedition, at the very top it says confidential, and it talks about Jefferson's goal for acquiring all of this land from the Indians from the Atlantic to Pacific. But the second part of that letter talks about our area, the Natchez Trace. It was critical for Jefferson to be able to acquire this land from the Indians to be able to control New Orleans and the Mississippi River. And so the second real purpose of this road, the Natchez Trace, was to be able to move large amounts of settlers down into what's now Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi to take over the land to be able to supply the militia to control this area. And so part of the goal of the Natchez Trace was to take the land away from the Indians as well. Jefferson sent his second in command, put General Wilkinson in charge of building this road, and he sent his second in command, Colonel Thomas S. Butler, to bring the soldiers in, and they brought 200 families that settled in Williamson County in 1801. They built this small cantonment they called Butler's Cantonment, and these soldiers began building this secret wagon highway through our area. Well, as Andrew Jackson looked at the plans for this map, the map of the survey of this new road, they were supposed to build it in the straightest line between Natchez and Nashville Courthouse. And the problem was that road was going to be about 5 miles west of what's now Franklin, through Leaper's Fork. And Jackson said, what's the purpose of building this fine new wagon highway 5 miles west of where all of the commerce is, where the towns are? That's going to pull all of the business away from Franklin and from the other places. And Jackson and his secret land partner, John Overton, just happened to own land in this area where moving the road would run right through. And so he prevailed on Colonel Butler to move this brand new wagon highway from Leaper's Fork to Franklin. Franklin through Granny White Pike into Nashville, where they were already using the old Natchez Trace. I never found the orders authorizing the move, but the soldiers stopped cutting the road through what's now Old Town on up through Pasco, and they moved over and they began building this secret wagon highway through South Hall, through Franklin, up Granny White Pike, into Nashville. And that became what we know now as the Natchez Trace. Butler was in trouble. Wilkinson found out about it. He ordered Butler to go to New Orleans to be court-martialed. And Butler prevailed on Andrew Jackson, his friend, to intervene for him. And Jackson was always willing to help friends. He began writing to Thomas Jefferson, and as the debate got more heated, he began referring to General Wilkinson as the public villain, even though he was the general in charge of the U.S. Army. You could imagine the fight that was beginning between these two men. Butler said that if he went to New Orleans when yellow fever was raging, it would be a death sentence, and he was right. He went to New Orleans for the court-martial, and he died from yellow fever, leaving two minor children that Andrew and Rachel raised at the Hermitage until they were adults. So it shows the friendship of the men and the fight that was going on. Well, as Jackson was trying to destroy Wilkinson's command, Wilkinson was fighting back in ways that Jackson didn't appreciate. Those of you who've seen the play Hamilton probably know that the villain, Aaron Burr, after he shot Hamilton, you may not know what happened to him after that. He came to Nashville. As part of this, I think Wilkinson used him as his pawn. He showed up on Andrew Jackson's doorstep in 1805, and he asked if he could just board his horses. And of course, Jackson was honored. The vice president of the United States wanted to board his horses in his stable, and he agreed. And Burr said he was going on down to New Orleans, and he would come back and pick up his horses after he finished his business. Jackson never appreciated the fact that Burr was actually going to New Orleans to meet with General Wilkinson, and he didn't know what they were up to. Jackson gave him a boat. Burr went down. He came back, and when Burr came back, he said he had information for Jackson. He had secret information he needed his help on. He said that Jefferson was negotiating with the Spanish to acquire the Florida Peninsula, and if negotiations didn't go well, he might need about 2,000 troops to defend this takeover of the Florida Peninsula. Well, Jackson saw this as his opportunity to be the next General George Washington, to push foreign power off American soil, and Jackson was all in for it. He even agreed to build the boats for this expedition, and he signed his name to these notes that were payable to Aaron Burr, making him part of whatever conspiracy Burr was part of. Burr left. They meet a couple more times. Jackson's having lunch at the Hermitage one day, and the gentleman comes back from New Orleans, and he mentions Burr, and he said, well, tell me what Burr is doing. And he said, don't you know? He said, Burr is trying to create a slave insurrection in New Orleans, and they're going to rob the Bank of New Orleans. They'll take the money. They'll hire mercenary soldiers. They're going to march to Washington, turn out Congress, and they're going to assassinate Thomas Jefferson. And Jackson realized he had signed the notes for this expedition. He was part of this conspiracy. And that started this letter-writing campaign, this publications in the newspaper where Jackson proclaimed that he was actually loyal to the United States. Secretary of War accused him of committing treason. And it was a very tough time in Andrew Jackson's life. Well, Wilkinson found out about it, and he turned on Burr, and he had Burr arrested for treason. Thomas Jefferson had Burr brought to Richmond for probably one of the first celebrity trials of our time. Here's the Vice President of the United States being tried for treason. Chief Justice John Marshall was presiding over it. Anybody of any fame shows up at the trial just to see what's going on. And Andrew Jackson is called as a witness, and he has to go up to this trial. And unlike everybody else in Richmond who talks in very polite society about the trial and the taverns after it's over, Andrew Jackson stands out in the street, and he proclaims that Burr is innocent and that Thomas Jefferson is prosecuting an innocent man for politics, and the real villain is General James Wilkinson, who is a traitor. And the people in Richmond think, well, this man is this wild man from the West we've heard about. He's crazy. We can't trust him. And Jackson says that if Wilkinson shows up to testify, he'll make the ground tremble 20 miles around him. And Wilkinson shows up for trial. Well, as Jackson predicted, the grand jury came within 2 votes of prosecuting Wilkinson for treason. But Thomas Jefferson stopped them because he wanted Wilkinson to defend New Orleans. And the story is told that as Jackson's friend saw Wilkinson coming down the street, he shoved him out into the street, into the mud, and everybody laughed at Wilkinson. And when Wilkinson got back safely to his headquarters, he said that the story was actually about Andrew Jackson. And he saw Andrew Jackson out in the street talking to a friend, and he stepped in between them, turned his back to Jackson, and began talking to the friend as an insult. And that rather than confronting him, he said Jackson sneaked off like a little puppy that had his ears cut off. And so you can see this fight that's building between these two men. And all the while, Jackson is trying to have Wilkinson dismissed from command. Jackson sees this opportunity as the War of 1812 approaches. The British are impressing our soldiers on the high seas. They're encouraging the Indians to massacre people in our area. And Jackson worked with his friends through Congress to have a war declaration passed against the British. All the while, Jackson is building up his forces here in Tennessee. He's training his soldiers. so that Jackson will be the general who will be best suited to go down and defend the Gulf Coast against the British to become the next General George Washington. Well, Jackson is successful. The war resolution is passed, the war hawks and and Jackson's friends in Congress. But when the order arrives in Nashville, there's a problem. Jackson sees Wilkinson behind it. Because Jackson is a high-ranking major general, Wilkinson is still a lower-ranking brigadier general. When the order comes in, it says that the Tennessee governor is to appoint a general in charge of these soldiers who's no higher in rank than a brigadier general, which means Jackson did not serve as his general. And he's ordered to bring together 2 regiments of soldiers, and those soldiers are to go down and they're to support General Wilkinson. So you see Wilkinson's fingerprints all over this. He somehow outmaneuvered Jackson. Well, Jackson won't have it. He has the political influence with the governor. He convinces him he's the one most ready to go to war. So Governor Wiley Blunt appoints Jackson to be the general in charge of to lead these soldiers. So Jackson asks for 2,000 soldiers to come into Nashville, but he has a secret plan. Rather than raise the 2 regiments he's authorized to raise, he's going to raise a 3rd secret regiment of cavalry. The cavalry is kind of like the tank units of the day. They're a stronger, more mobile force. And rather than just going down to support Wilkinson, these soldiers will go down and they'll approach Wilkinson's camp like an enemy camp. The infantry will go down the Cumberland, the Ohio, the Mississippi, but then the secret force will go down the Natchez Trace, this cavalry force, and they'll approach Wilkinson's camp from 2 sides. They'll overtake Wilkinson, they'll go on down and take Mobile and the Florida Peninsula away from the Spanish. That's Jackson's plan, but he has to keep it secret. And so the soldiers come into Nashville. They say it's one of the coldest days anyone can remember, December 10th, 1812. It begins snowing in the morning. By the evening, there's more than a foot of snow on the ground. But despite that fact, more than 2,000 young Tennessee boys show up to go off and serve under Andrew Jackson in this great expedition. And from that day forward, Tennessee has been known as the volunteer state. That's how we were known as volunteer state. So you can imagine these young boys there in downtown, what was then a very small town of Nashville, didn't go beyond 7th Avenue, for the first time. And it's really the first occasion that this number of people have come together as Tennesseans to support their state, Tennessee. And the man who orchestrated all of this is Andrew Jackson. He's the one who will then lead them on. Most of these boys were teenagers like today's soldiers, but back then some of them were as young as 12 years old. It was their first time away from home. You can imagine their mothers letting them go for the first time. And so Andrew Jackson promises them and their families that he will be a father to them. He will take them, he will train them, he will help them survive in this wilderness environment they're getting ready to set off in. And so they set off in January 1813. And Jackson discovers he's got problems with the War Department that General Wilkinson controls. He's supposed to have money to pay the men. The money never shows up. He has to borrow money from the Bank of Nashville to fund these soldiers. He's supposed to have weapons. The weapons don't show up. The men haven't gotten more than as far as Clarksville on the river when they stop to get the food that they're going to take all the way down to Natchez. And they look at the pork barrels and the flour barrels, and there's only half as much flour as supposed to have. And when Jackson opens the pork barrels, he finds the pork's not been well salted. He said he even found pig skulls mixed in with the pork that would have made the meat rancid within weeks, I suspect, Wilkinson. As General Coffee comes down through Franklin, goes on down the Natchez Trace and crosses over the Tennessee River into the main Chickasaw area, he's supposed to find food that's been laid out for the men by contractors at all these stands along the old Natchez Trace or ends along the trace. The food's missing, or it's never been delivered, I suspect Wilkinson. And when Coffee approaches the Chickasaw chief Colbert and asks about it, he finds that the Chickasaw are really skittish and he doesn't know why. And he said, well, some white gentleman told us that when you come through, you will assassinate all the Chickasaw leaders and take everything from the Chickasaw that they have. I suspect Wilkinson. Coffee is able to work out a deal with Colbert, and he says, as his men then rode down the Natchez Trace, that he saw Chickasaw Indians appearing by the road, and they were carrying corn and fodder on their backs to give the men to feed them as they went on down the Natchez Trace. And Coffee was touched because he said he thought this was all the food these Indians had to survive the rest of the winter. If they had not done that, Coffee's soldiers would have starved to death. And they would not have made their way back. So the Indians helped Andrew Jackson become Old Hickory as part of this expedition. When Coffee went on down to the Choctaw area, he found the same thing. Someone had told him that he would assassinate all the Choctaw leaders. Well, as Jackson is going down the Mississippi River, he's north of Natchez, And Wilkinson finds out Jackson's coming down. He's got more soldiers than he thought, and that means he's going to overtake me in New Orleans. Wilkinson has to figure out some way of stopping him short of New Orleans. And so Wilkinson sends Jackson a letter with a trick. He gives him a carrot and a stick. The carrot is, if you stop in Natchez, you'll find this fine federal fort where you can stage your soldiers for the expedition that you really want, which is Mobile in Florida. And we'll pay you and we'll feed you. And if you come on down to New Orleans, fever is raging, and all your men will catch the fever and they will die. And he knew that the one enemy Andrew Jackson feared was fever, because it had taken his family and wiped out soldiers. So Jackson wasn't sure what to do. His orders were to go to New Orleans, but he really wanted to become the next General George Washington. And his ambition blinded him. He didn't think about, well, all of this is coming from Wilkinson. I don't need to trust Wilkinson. But he fell for it. He decided he would stop in Natchez, and he would see whatever orders the War Department had from there. Natchez is about 200 miles short of New Orleans. And Jackson had read that when Wilkinson came through Natchez years earlier, he came through like the Roman Emperor Nero as a conquering general, these grand parades. So Jackson wanted to show everybody the greater general has arrived, and so he plans this grand parade through Natchez, and it works. Everybody comes out to see this conquering hero, Jackson, coming into town who's going to save us from the British. He hadn't gotten more than 6 miles outside Natchez when he saw the fort that Wilkinson had promised him. He looked up on the hill, and he realized he had been taken, because rather than this fine fort that would be a good staging area, Jackson said it was a fort designed to divide his forces, to actually weaken them and divide them and kill them. It was rotting, it was falling down. He found a collection of filth inside that would make the men sick within a week. Jackson realized he had been taken. But he soon discovered he had greater problems, because here he was 500 miles from home, and Wilkinson controlled food. Wilkinson controlled medicines. Wilkinson controlled transportation. Wilkinson controlled arms. Jackson was a general without any of that. And Jackson told Wilkinson, who had once been a dance master in Pennsylvania, a soldier without a sword is like a bow and a ball without shoes. Both were unprepared. Jackson realized he was in a very precarious position, because he didn't have any of those things needed for his men even to survive. And so he did what he never dreamed he would have to do. He sat down, swallowed his pride, and began writing letters begging Wilkinson, his enemy, for food and medicines for his men. Wilkinson promised, and if you read the letters back and forth, they're trying on the surface to be polite, to show everyone they're cooperating, but beneath it, they're both trying to destroy each other. And Wilkinson never does provide what he promises he'll provide. Soldiers begin to get sick. 150 men are sick. 56 can't even raise their heads, and then they begin to die. And so on March 14th, it comes to a head. Jackson is seated in this worship service listening to Reverend William preach this sermon. The soldier comes in and hands him this letter from Wilkinson. And Wilkinson has bragged to his underlings that when Jackson gets this letter, it will be like a thunderclap out of a clear blue sky. And it is. Because Winnian says he's never seen a general curse as much as Jackson did when he opened this letter. When he opened the letter, it supposedly had an order from the Secretary of War telling Jackson he was dismissed from service. He was to abandon his men. He was to turn over every piece of equipment that he had to his enemy, General James Wilkinson. Even the tents covering the men were to be given to General James Wilkinson, and that was it. And Jackson realized he had to make a decision. Ultimately, it was, do you abandon these boys? If you do, many of them will die. Or do you face a firing squad? That's a tough decision. And then one of Jackson's biographers said he looked out at the camp, and some of the young boys who were sick looked at Jackson with tears in their eyes and reminded him he had promised to be a father to him and begged him not to abandon them. So what does he do? Well, if you know Andrew Jackson, you know what he decided to do. Jackson decided to commit mutiny. He said he led the men into the field, and he would at all risk and cost lead them back home. But he had to pull the support needed practically out of thin air. So he called on one of his friends in Natchez to borrow a little bit of funds to get some food. And he hoped that if he could get the soldiers back as far north as the Tennessee River, that the Tennessee governor would meet him there with the supplies they would need to get the boys all the way home. But he had to have the wagons, because so many young men were sick and they couldn't walk, they couldn't ride the horses. And he begged for wagons. General Wilkinson refused to provide the wagons. And so he said, all right, if you want these tents, then have them in my camp on March 24th, and you can pick up the tents. Well, Wilkinson fell for it then. He brought 11 baggage wagons into the camp. When those wagons rolled into the camp, Jackson told his men to seize the wagons from the U.S. Army. So he stole 11 baggage wagons to bring his boys back home to Tennessee. They started back up the Natchez Trace. He sent an express rider to Nashville begging for the supplies that they needed. And they hadn't gotten more than 6 miles out of Natchez until a lot more men began falling ill. And Jackson realized that even the wagons wouldn't hold the sick men. And they needed every horse they had. And so Jackson dismounted his horse, and from that point, he walked all the way back to Nashville with his men along the old Natchez Trace. And it's said by one of his biographers on the way back, the boys looked at him. Some days that they were walking in mud up to their ankles. Some days they were walking in water up to their waist. And here was this man they considered old, 46 years old, leading them. And along the way, one of the boys said, "Look at that old man. That man's tough." William said, "That man's as tough as Hickory." Finally said, "That man's old Hickory." And rather than criticizing the boys or stopping them, Jackson realized that might be the only badge of honor he would get for this whole expedition. Because he was looking at facing a firing squad. He was looking at losing everything he worked his entire life for because of this decision that he made as they head back up the Natchez Trace. They hadn't gotten as far north as the Choctaw Agency. A rider met them from Nashville with a letter from the governor. He said that he had no authority to provide Jackson any food or resources. Jackson was on his own. Jackson suspected Wilkinson had somehow outmaneuvered him, even in Nashville with his friends. So he had no idea what he would face on the way back. But he had no option but to continue on as best he could. Again, the Indians fed Jackson's soldiers as they went back toward Nashville. Jackson had, as they crossed the Tennessee River, he looked across, and there were the families of the boys waiting for them on the other side. They had gotten word that their sons and fathers and husbands were in trouble, and they gathered up the horses and the wagons, and they came down to rescue these boys from this expedition, which was a relief to Jackson. But for the person who wanted to be the next General George Washington, it was a humiliating defeat. And then Jackson had to go to Nashville for the dismissal ceremony. The War Department under Wilkinson refused to pay the men for their service. He had to look them in the face and tell them he didn't have the money to pay them. And as he stood on the public square, he looked out and he faced his enemies, people who are asking, why did you lead all these boys away? Some of them have died. We've accomplished nothing. And that very morning, the Nashville newspaper reported that General Wilkinson had just taken Mobile. That was the mission Jackson had won. It was really a low point in Andrew Jackson's life. The Tennessee governor was there, totally oblivious to what had gone on. And as he stood on this dismissal ceremony, he handed Jackson this flag that the ladies in Knoxville had sewn as a victory flag over the British. He handed it to Jackson anyway. And he says, "As you accept this flag, I hope that you will know that on every occasion you will be ably supported by your state." That's the same governor who refused to provide Jackson money for the food for the men. So I often say the fact that Jackson didn't take out his pistol and shoot the governor shows just how much he had grown on this expedition. When Jackson came back, in this chapter in his life, everyone thought it was a total defeat. There were stories of some of his officers crying like babies when they come back. They think it's all been for nothing. We're at a total loss. Jackson will never be a general. What they didn't realize was that all these boys had never served in the Army before. Jackson had never commanded an expedition, and they were green recruits. If they had faced the British at that point, they probably would have all been wiped out. But through this very arduous experience, they had all been hardened. They had all been tested. And they were now soldiers, and Jackson was now a general, and they were loyal to their general. So within just 6 months, when word came that the settlers had been attacked in the Creek Nation, Jackson put on his uniform, told his men to meet him. These boys all showed up again for the general who had not abandoned them. I call this the missing chapter in Jackson's life because it's the first time the details of this story have been told. But I think it really did change Andrew Jackson into Old Hickory. Choctaw Chief Pushpataha, he was another warrior who liked to brag. And someone asked him one day, he said, "How were you born? Where did you come from?" And Pushpataha said, "I was not born as a mortal man, but rather one day when lightning struck a mighty oak tree, it split apart, and full-grown Pushpataha warrior popped out." I think when Andrew Jackson got that letter from Wilkinson, that was the thunderclap that split the old Andrew Jackson apart. He had lived up to that point in his life like the teenager who had never had his father's guidance. He lived for himself. He lived for his friends. He was wild and reckless. But for the first time in his life, he had to make a decision. Do you risk everything, even your own life, for somebody other than yourself? Every Tennessee boy, the poorest Tennessee boy, will you risk everything for that person? And Andrew Jackson decided to do that. And I think it changed his life. I think it hardened him into Old Hickory. And it just happened to be his 46th birthday when he made that decision. I think that was the day that Andrew Jackson was born on the Natchez Trace, when Andrew Jackson became the man we know as general and the man we know as president. That's the missing chapter in Andrew Jackson's life. I've written about it in the book. It tells the story of the old Natchez Trace. There's a lot more with Tecumseh. the earthquake of 1812, the comet. It was amazing that all these things happened within a short period of time when everybody thought the world was coming to an end. The two political parties were fighting so much they were actually taking up arms against each other. No one knew what to do. Andrew Jackson stood up, offered the lead, and it changed the future of our country's history. Thank you.
Tony, thank you so much for your presentation. Please accept this as a token of our appreciation for speaking today. And if you would autograph this book for us. We read to first graders in the elementary schools. We'd love to read your book, but our Rotarians, this is what they're capable of reading at the moment. So if you would sign this, we would appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right. 1 o'clock today. Nice. All right, so if there's nothing else for the good, please remember, leave the chairs and tables where they are, but if you clean up everything on top of it, that'd be great. Pancake meeting across from reception and a brief board meeting up here right after we're done. Nothing else for the good of Rotary. We are adjourned. First one,